And I turn the floor over to Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Senator, and congratulations to both of you. Senator, it's good to see you again, and I enjoyed the conversation in my office. I'm just going to cover a couple topics here today. You mentioned in response to a question that it was important to have our friends and allies with us in a unified stance with respect to our policy in China. I fully agree. One of the things we hear from our allies in East Asia, Japan, South Korea, friends like Taiwan, is that what happens in Ukraine matters to what happens with respect to Taiwan. In other words, that President Xi has one eye on what's happening in Ukraine and another with respect to Taiwan in terms of U.S. resolve and the credibility of our allies. Do you agree with that simple statement?
Well, I think that's a complex comparison, and I'm not sure of what President Xi is thinking or not thinking, except what he says. And he has said over and over the last 10 years that, the reunification is very important to the PRC and the CCP. Our role in that is simply that we're going to continue to honor the one, China policy as stated in the Taiwan Relations Act, also backed up by the 3 communiques and the 6 assurances. So the situation is a little more complex than just making a binary comparison between, I think, Ukraine and Taiwan.
Well, certainly there are differences between Taiwan and Ukraine. I wasn't suggesting otherwise, but I was suggesting what our allies tell us. You just said it was important to be united with our allies. I can just tell you what our allies have been telling us repeatedly, is that what happens in Ukraine impacts and influences the way Xi thinks about Taiwan and the situation there. I think all of us, not all of us, but on a bipartisan basis, many of us have been deeply concerned with the way President Trump threw Ukraine under the bus and President Zelensky under the bus and called Ukraine the aggressor. At the same time, we know that China has been supporting Russia. Of course, President Xi famously said that the bonds of friendship between China and Russia know no boundaries. The previous administration made clear that if China was to supply military assistance to Russia, that would result in some kind of sanctions or punitive response from the United States. Do you agree that we should make it clear to China that that kind of assistance would be unacceptable from our point of view?
The situation is, with regard to Ukraine, is not, I wouldn't characterize it as throwing them on their bus, Senator. I would just personally disagree with that. I think over 300 plus.
Senator, you know how this works. I get that. If you could just answer the question. I asked you, you agreed that the previous administration's policy, that it would trigger sanctions from the United States if China were to provide offensive or to provide military equipment to Russia.
Well,
you agree or disagree?
I agree, and we already have sanctions on them about cross-border trade right now between China and Russia on dual use, and we know that 80% of what Russia has available to on dual use comes from China, and we know a lot of that is ending up in the Ukraine. So yes, I fully support that. I think President Trump's strategy does the same.
Okay. So I do want to follow up on some of the questions Senator Merkley raised, because I think it's indisputable that Elon Musk has an enormous amount of influence in this administration. He's single-handedly gone about, firing lots of federal employees. He said he was going to put AID through the wood chipper. He actually said it was a criminal enterprise. And I think others have pointed out, including Senator Shaheen, that on a bipartisan basis, we thought that AID has been an important part of U.S. soft power. And we've already seen instances of where AIDs retreated in the last couple months that China has worked to fill the void. And I do want to just read a statement by Vivek Ramaswamy, who was originally, of course, Musk's partner in the DOGE effort before he left it. And this is what he said in 2023, quote, "Tesla is increasingly beholden to China." And then on his podcast, he said, and I quote, "I have no reason to think Elon won't jump like a circus monkey when Xi Jinping calls in the hour of need, unquote. He also referred to Musk as a Chinese puppet. So do you agree, would you agree that we should have concerns that somebody with the amount of influence that Elon Musk has in this administration is getting briefings at the Defense Department? Fortunately, they called off, apparently, the war plan on Taiwan. But doesn't it concern you that somebody like that might have an inordinate amount of influence with respect to
Well, first of
policies?
all, I'm not going to discredit the individual, but that comment is coming from an individual who was fired basically by the Doge for not doing his job. So my view is that what they're doing is
Are
absolutely
you
necessary. I think
referring
we
to
all.
Vivek Ramaswamy?
Yes.
Being fired?
Yeah.
Okay, just one.
I think that, you know, what they're trying to do, I think we all would agree to. I mean, we've got to find a way to get better use of the money we spend in the federal government. When it relates to the breadth of responsibility of what Doge is doing, the president has said publicly, this is 132 days. They're well into that now. I think they had a press conference this week about the results so far. Look, when you go in, I've done this several times in the corporate world, when you go in and do this kind of effort, there's going to be some areas that you have to come back and clean up. And even Elon Musk said that this week, as a matter of fact. So I agree with you that it's a careful process. We need to make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. At the same time, again, I'll relate my comment earlier about the debt funding of everything we're doing here. And by the way, the overhead of USAID, let me say this one more time. The overhead of USAID is redundant in so many cases. I think that CARE does a great job around the world. It's about $1 billion benefit. We fund about 1/3 of that. A friend of mine runs it, but they only have about a 10% overhead. So if you add USAID overhead on top of what CARE is doing, you end up with an unacceptable level of overhead.
I'll end with this. With respect, this committee, the chairman of this committee, has not held a hearing so that we could ask these very questions. Senator Shaheen has had 2 rump hearings with AID officials, which tell a very different story than is being portrayed by Elon Musk and company, who again called it a criminal enterprise, which, as I've said, makes every member of this committee a co-conspirator in a criminal enterprise.
Well, I don't issue that kind of proclamation, Senator. I don't want to be associated with that. But what I just said, I'll stand by in terms of the overhead.
But he's the one that did that at AID, and that is what he said. And he said he wanted to put it through the wood chipper, not reform. So we should be very clear about what they're doing, not what they want us to think they're doing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Van